He stood up in the PTA meeting and told the whole room I was dangerous. He called me reckless, said I was unreliable with the kids, and then his wife smiled like I'd been caught red-handed. That image, his chest up, her smile like a verdict, replayed in my head for weeks, a short, bitter film. I didn't know then that what followed would be the kind of small-town public shaming that rewires the way people look at you. I taught middle school English, I ran after-school writing clubs and did weekend tutoring for a little extra cash. I wore the same cardigan 3 winters in a row and I brought home baked muffins to staff meetings. I thought my name meant something quiet, reliable. Ernest, the woman who remembered details about students' essays. In the space of 1 hour, that name was scaffolding under gossip. The perfect family who shamed me had a brand. They owned it. Their street had immaculate hydrangeas, matching holiday lights, a book collection meant to inspire envy at a dinner party. He was on the school board, she ran the PTA and had cutesy Instagram highlights titled Mom Wins and Volunteer Life. Everyone admired the spread of their weekend barbecues. Their daughter, Emma, sat 2 rows in front of me in school plays with a practiced smile. When they stood up and accused me, people nodded as if they'd always suspected something. The principal put me on administrative leave that afternoon pending an investigation. My calendar filled with canceled meetings. The kids in my program were told to bring their things home. Social media whispered. My reputation, which had been years of small acts, thinned overnight. What they accused me of was petty sounding to anyone who hadn't sat with the humiliation, mishandling permission slips and being lax about drop-off times. But in the world of school politics, petty becomes big fast. Their Instagram post, a long captioned photo of our girls safe and thriving with an insinuation at the end, was framed as a public service announcement. Within days, strangers called the program administrators asking questions, parents texted difficult messages, and a donor rescinded a pledge. When your livelihood lives in the public square and someone pulls a thread, the fabric comes apart. At first I spiraled. I sat on my back porch and tried to breathe. Why them? Why now? I replayed the last 6 months. The way I'd publicly disagreed with the PTA budget at a meeting, the small line in which I'd said this district needed transparency when it came to vendor contracts. I remembered suggesting we audit the books after noticing duplicate line items for art supplies that looked too large for our modest program. I remembered the hush that followed my suggestion and how one of the PTA board members quickly changed the subject. I'd thought I was being responsible. I hadn't known that I'd poked a hornet's nest. Panic is an expensive fuel. It cost me sleep and then clever thinking replaced it. I stopped calling friends and started making lists. If they wanted to make a public spectacle, I would counter with the one thing that tends to cut through noise: records. I printed every email I'd ever sent about schedules and permission slips. I pulled the calendar invites showing when parents dropped off and when staff signed in. Most importantly, I recorded the timeline of every interaction with Emma's family, politely. Methodically, like someone building a ledger, the first ally came from an unexpected place: Leo, the school's part-time bookkeeper, who worked late nights reconciling ledgers and who wore the kind of humility that made him invisible in meetings. He sent me a private message: "You saw what I see. Call me after school if you have time." When I sat across from him in the fluorescent-lit copy room, his fingers smudged with toner, he slid a photocopy across the metal table, a payment ledger. "Notice this," he said. 2 invoices, same vendor, same month, same amount. I lost a steady tutoring client. A friend's partner mentioned at dinner that it was complicated and left it there. There were the small deaths that accompany public shame: being disinvited to a birthday party you'd hosted last year, being looked over in a coffee shop, but the audit began. An independent auditor, a gray-haired CPA from the county office, called one morning. He had the kind of voice that suggested he'd sat through worse than PTA budgets. He arrived with a laptop and 30 years of suspicion practice. He asked for invoices, bank statements, fundraising deposit slips. He cross-referenced vendor merchant account numbers against the PTA's vendor list. The first finding was a soft blow. Multiple transactions labeled as school event fees had been funneled to the couple's LLC that had been described as an event planning service. But the goods and services didn't match the invoices. More troubling, several fundraiser cash deposits were missing from bank reconciliations and instead were replaced by checks made out to the couple's company. The auditor's face hardened as numbers began to form a picture: income diverted, false invoices, and coinciding personal payouts to the family. Armed with that preliminary report, I took another practical step. I preserved the direct evidence surrounding the smear. I had already backed up my emails, but I also asked parents for anything they still had: text threads about the PTA bake sale, receipts from the fundraiser, photographs with timestamps showing who handled the money. One parent, Maria, brought me a photo of Emma handing an envelope to the mother and the mother's hand stuffing it into a tote with the company logo. Maria was terrified of speaking up publicly. "They'll cancel my invite to everything," she whispered. I promised I would keep her anonymous, and she slid me the photo as if offering a relic. The audacity of the family's behavior accelerated their exposure. There was also the human piece: people who had been involved but too frightened to speak at first. The PTA's former treasurer, Ellen, a soft-spoken retired schoolteacher, reached out via a mutual friend. She had been replaced abruptly the year before under confusing circumstances. "I thought I was being asked to step down for health reasons," she said over tea. "But I kept copies of bank statements. I kept my files at home." Ellen handed me a thick envelope with backdated reconciliation notes showing checks that were marked donation but had been endorsed by the couple's business account. She told me she'd been too intimidated to mention it because the couple had a way of making people feel small. I tried not to cry when Ellen said that. Instead, I copied the pages, cataloged the check numbers, and added them to the evidence folder that had become my talisman. Legal winds began to change. The superintendent convened an emergency meeting and the district placed the PTA's funds under temporary oversight. The county prosecutor's office, prompted by the auditor's report and a formal complaint from the district, opened an inquiry into potential embezzlement and fraud. I sat in the prosecutor's office and watched the way the attorney reviewed patterns, matched names, and then made a few calls. "We'll need interviews with witnesses," she said. "We'll issue subpoenas for bank records and for company invoices." The machinery that had initially been slow began to move at a speed that felt like justice. When the subpoenas arrived, the couple's behavior shifted from defiant to frantic. The husband publicly declared that he had done nothing wrong and that the charges were politically motivated. The mother took to social media to spin another story: that I was a disgruntled teacher trying to smear a family because of a grudge. Their PR consultant coached them on posture and language. But the records are patient: merchant details, check endorsements, invoice dates. The program survived in a new shape, leaner, but better audited. What stayed with me was not triumph in a shallow sense. It was the recognition that power sometimes hides behind niceties: holiday parties, well-curated Instagram posts, a warm handshake at a fundraiser. The couple used that veneer to buffer what they'd been doing with invoices and checks. When veneer cracks, people feel exposed. It's human to want to lash out. Their public shaming campaign was a preemptive strike meant to inoculate them against scrutiny. It failed because scrutiny arrived, patient and bureaucratic and unglamorous, and because neighbors and insiders decided not to look away. if there is a practical ending here. It is not about enjoying someone's fall. It's about 3 simple, actionable things I learned that can protect you if your reputation is weaponized. Document and preserve. Keep copies of emails, receipts, calendars, and photos. Use timestamps and backup to more than one place. If you're accused, the first thing that cuts through noise is verifiable records. Build a quiet network of trusted witnesses, people who notice things, bookkeepers, custodians, retired volunteers, often see small patterns that make a case. Respect their fear, protect their anonymity when they ask. Use process, not pressure. Start with official channels, audits, public records requests, legal counsel. Systems of review may be slow, but they are designed to translate suspicion into evidence. When the dust settled and the town's lawnmowers started humming on a spring morning, I walked past the couple's house once. The hydrangeas were still there, trimmed neat as ever. I didn't feel a need to gloat. I felt, instead, a deep, quiet fatigue and a strange peace. I had been shamed, yes, and exposed in the very public way of small towns. But I'd also learned that the right kind of patience, the kind that gathers documents and witnesses and files the right forms. And the bank's own notations about return deposits cannot be argued away in a deposition. One pivotal moment came when the accountant for the couple's LLC, a woman named Priya who had been hired months earlier to clean up bookkeeping, walked into my kitchen with a paper bag and sat down. She'd reached out after reading a local blog post about the audit. Her hands trembled as she placed a stack of spreadsheets on my counter. "I was told to reconcile creatively," she said. "To move line items here and there so numbers balanced." I didn't feel right, but I thought the couple were just using a business to help the PTA. I didn't see how deep it was until I found checks made out to them from the bake sale. Priya explained how she'd found a series of memos that linked fundraiser proceeds to accounts outside the PTA. "I kept copies," she said. "I can authenticate these if needed." Her cooperation folded like a card under the gust of subpoena. The town, predictably, reversed its earlier posture slowly and then all at once. People who had flocked to the family's Instagram now found their feeds filled with legal notices, court dockets, names, dates. The husband resigned from the school board. The mother was removed from her volunteer leadership role pending the outcome. The prosecutor's office filed charges for embezzlement and false accounting. The local paper ran a front-page narrative about how charity can be exploited. And the headline included names and a photograph of the couple's home, the hydrangeas suddenly looking like props in a courtroom drama. I did not bask in their ruin. There are no confetti moments that make up for nights of being unable to teach because the day's logistics were consumed with legal interviews. The students returned slowly, their parents cautiously asking for reassurances. The donor who had pulled his pledge returned with conditions: independent oversight, transparent accounting, and a quarterly report. Can turn rumor into record and humiliation into a call for accountability. If this story connected with you, please like and subscribe. You don't have to fight unfairly. Keep receipts. Keep your people. Let the record speak.